Welcome to Nazarene, Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and I'm the apostle for the restoration of the original first century faith. In this part 9 of Revelation Simplified, we want to talk about the two Babylonian beasts that come up from the sea and from the land in Revelation chapter 13. And actually what we're going to see is these are two different aspects of the same beast. One is a governmental aspect, and the other one is a religious and spiritual aspect. So to help people put things in the proper perspective and context, we've been talking about the simplified Revelation timeline. The second line down, the 7 seals play out over 2,000 years. And on the third line down, we have 7 trumpets, which play out over 7 years. And the last 3.5 of these years is what's called the time of Jacob's trouble. At the end of this time comes trumpet 7, and that's when the great harlot Babylon is judged. And as a result of the judgment, the 7 cups or 7 bowls of wrath are going to be poured out on her. But before we get to that, we need to talk about inset chapters 12, 13, and 14. And in the last section, we talked about the woman and child, or Israel in the wilderness. In this chapter, chapter 13, we're talking about the two beasts that rise up from the sea and from the land. And what we're going to see is that actually it's all the same beast. It's just two different facets or two different aspects of the same combined Babylonian beast. And this is the same beast we've been talking about since we've been talking about Daniel chapter 2. And this is where King Nebuchadnezzar saw a dream of a statue set up on the earth in 5 parts. The first 4 parts represented a series of physical empires. And the 5th part, the feet of iron mixed with clay, represent a spiritual extension. Now, as we've already seen, the rabbinical order dwells in Babylon in the head of gold, and that's why the Jews are in control in the natural. But then in empire number 3, the Alexander the Great's Macedonian or Greek empire, this is where the concept of democracy was introduced. Very important. We also see that democracy was practiced in ancient Rome. And still today, when we're talking about the Roman Christian nations infused with pockets of Islam, most of these Roman Christian-style nations are, in fact, almost all of them, are ruled by democracy. So what we're going to see is that democracy is the key principle, that this is a Greco-Roman principle. And we're going to see that it basically is introduced by Esau. So Esau being Greece and Rome. And without this democratic principle, these 3 other theistic groups would not come together. So if we take a look at this in a different form, in sort of a schematic, we've taken a look at this before, but what we see is the same picture here with the black horse rabbis in the head, and they secretly pull the strings of the Pope and the United Religions Initiative. But then we see a red horse United Nations and a United Religions Initiative, that these are going to be sort of a firewall in between the rabbis who are up top of the pyramid and all the other religions of the world that are down sort of jammed below altogether, the white or pink horse combined with the green horse, the Muslim peoples, and all other religions are to be jammed together as what are called Noachides by the 7 what are called the Noachide laws. But one of the things we're going to see here that's very important, and we'll have to explain this later, is that the black horse controls the red horse governmentally in the here and now, here in the temporal realm. But we're also going to see later, when we get to chapter 18, that the red horse controls Babylon spiritually. So in other words, Babylon reports to Satan, effectively. So in the spiritual realm, it's the red horse. It's Satan that's in charge. But in the natural, we're going to see that it's the black horse that's in charge. So just sort of hang on to that thought. But the concept of democracy gluing everything together is very important one. And Yeshua spoke to this in Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 25. And it says, "But Yeshua knew their thoughts and said to them, 'Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. And as we see in other places, this is effectively what democracy is it's a means of taking a divided house and holding it together with a certain amount of glue, so to speak. In other words, everyone desires to be king, and so everyone with his vote, that's what holds the thing together. But continuing in verse 26, Yeshua says, if Satan casts out Satan, he's divided against himself. And this is what we see in the Babylonian kingdom. He says, how then will his kingdom stand? And in fact, we know that his kingdom will not stand, because this is what happens at trumpet 7, is the democratic principle no longer serves to hold things together. So here we go. This is an inset chapter, Revelation chapter 13 and verse 1. It says, then I stood on the sand of the sea, and the sea is symbolic of people. And I saw a beast, in context a Babylonian democratic beast, rising up out of the sea. And the sea being symbolic of people, what we're talking about is a democracy. We're talking about a new world order. The United Nations brought to full power, where the people are sort of bought in through the popular vote. It says having 7 heads, we'll see those again, and 10 horns. We've seen those before. We've talked about the 10 toes of the statue. We've also talked about the 10 supernations that are being devised by the Club of Rome. And on his horns, 10 crowns, or 10 kingdoms. Again, these 10 supernations. And on his heads, a blasphemous name. Now the beast, or the beast government, which I saw, was like a leopard, which we saw before was Greece. His feet were like the feet of a bear, which is Medo-Persia, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion, which is Babylon. But now notice, it says, the dragon, me referring to Satan, gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. So if we take a look now in Daniel chapter 2, the head of gold symbolized Babylon. In Daniel chapter 7, Babylon was likened unto a lion. And here in the composite beast, the beast has a mouth of a lion, or mouth like a lion. In Daniel chapter 2, the Medo-Persian Empire was likened unto a chest and arms of silver. In Daniel chapter 7, the Medo-Persian Empire was likened unto a bear, and here the composite beast has the feet of a bear. In Daniel 2, the third empire, Alexander the Great's Macedonian or Greek Empire, was likened unto the belly and thighs of bronze. In Daniel 7, it was likened unto a leopard with wings, because it spread eastward so rapidly throughout the eastern leg of the Roman Empire. In Revelation 13, in the composite beast, the whole beast is like, it says it's like a leopard, because a leopard, and again, the leopard spread eastward so rapidly, but also Islam spread very rapidly throughout the globe. In Daniel chapter 2, we get to the 2 legs of iron, which is the Roman Empire. The spiritual extension is the feet of iron mixed with Islamic clay. In Daniel 7, this is likened unto the beast having iron teeth and bronze nails. Remember, bronze referring to Greece, but we also saw that Greece then morphs into clay. So then it becomes the beast of iron infused with pockets of miry Islamic clay. And here in the composite beast in Revelation 13, we're told that Satan is the one that gives them their power, their seat, and their authority. So we talk about the importance of having a seat. When we talk about a seat, we're talking about a throne, especially we're talking about a headquarters. So in January the 2nd of 2013, we read a report in Arutz Sheva, which is a Israel national news, where the Prime Minister Netanyahu and the government of Israel gave a seat for the Pope at King David's tomb. And so basically in the room above the tomb of King David, sometimes it's considered the room where the Last Supper was held. The papacy has now been given control over that room. So now today, as of 2013, the papacy has a seat in Jerusalem. And this is something they've been seeking for a long time, because it's literally the fulfillment of prophecy. So continuing on in Revelation 13 and verse 3, realizing that the papacy now has a seat, It says, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded. Now we're talking about the governmental beast, or the governmental aspect of the Babylonian beast. We're talking about level number 5. So we're discussing the Protestant breakaway. And we've got two heads we're going to see here. We've got Catholicism and we've also got Islam. So we talk about a mortal wound delivered to Catholicism. We could be talking about the Protestant breakaway, except that wound wasn't really mortal. It was a deep, severe wound, and they're attempting to heal it through the ecumenical movement, but it wasn't exactly mortal. The Ottoman Empire, we'll see in the next slide, now that was a mortal wound. The Ottoman Empire ceased to exist in 1922. So it says, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed after the beast. So again, we know that Rome and Islam operate together, just as Esau intermarried with Ishmael. And so these things, it's kind of hard to separate out. And again, we're talking about the governmental aspect of the beast. But when we talk about the Ottoman Islamic Empire, we're talking about Turkey. The Turkish Empire grew and grew until it was finally defeated at the walls of Vienna on September the 11th, 1683. And then the empire finally dissolved in 1922, after World War I. But it is believed that the events of September the 11th, 2001 are sort of symbolic of a restoration of we might call the Turkish or the Ottoman or the Islamic Empire, sort of as if to say, we're back, this kind of a thing. So continuing in verse 4, they worship the dragon. So the people worship the dragon, meaning Satan, who gave authority to the Babylonian beast. And they worship the Babylonian beast, saying, who is like him? Who is like the beast? And who is able to make war with him? So if we think about the Babylonian beast, we think about the entire Judeo-Christian and Islamic world, plus everything else that is presently held together with that Judeo-Christian and Islamic world through the principle of democracy. We're talking about almost the entire globe has been given into the hand of the beast. So again, who is like the beast and who can fight with him? So this is a time that's coming up. And in verse 5, we read that he was given a mouth speaking great things and great blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. And in context, this may be 42 months of the time of Jacob's trouble, when the abomination that makes desolate is set up on the Temple Mount. We don't know that, but that's a theory. We'll have to wait and see. But in verse 6, it says, then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against Elohim, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So this may very well be a future time of persecution. So we're talking about the time of Jacob's trouble. We imagine it's going to be more intense inside the land of Israel, but those members of Jacob living outside the land of Israel may not have an easy time of it either. We know there will be some places worse than others, but it'll be centered on the land, but also probably encompassing the whole world. Verse 8, but we do know the principle that the farther we are away from Babylon, the more safety there is. Verse 8, it says, all those who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. But of course, there's those who will not worship the beast, because they are those whom the beast will persecute. Verse 9, it says, and if anyone has an ear, let him hear. That means this is very important, and not everyone's going to get this. But if you can get this, we need to get this. It says, he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So it always distresses me. We see all these things where people are talking about how we're going to band together with arms and the Second Amendment, and roll things back to the Constitution, effectively sort of shoot our way into the kingdom of heaven. And that is not what this verse says. If we have ears to hear, it says, here is the patience and the faith of the saints, because we're sent out like lambs among wolves. So it will be a time of trial for all of us. But again, here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So Yeshua tells us in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 23, he says, and when they persecute you in this city, flee to another. For assuredly I say to you, you will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. So the concept we are to practice is that when we are persecuted, we are to move on and to take the Great Commission with us as a means of evangelizing the world. So continuing on to verse 11. It says, then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. Now it's the same beast. It's the same Babylonian beast, but this is a religious aspect. And as we're going to see, it's a state-sponsored government religious aspect. A state government religion, just like Rome has always preferred to have a government-sponsored religion. It says, and he had two horns like a lamb. We believe this is Catholicism and Islam, just like we saw earlier in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. And he spoke like a dragon. So once again, we've got a dragon speaking, but now there's two horns like a lamb. And we know it's a religious aspect, so it's going to be, just like we've seen before, we've got Catholicism and Islam, and we know that the two are linked. There's all sorts of spiritual indications that the two are linked. One of Emperor Constantine moving his capital to Byzantium or Constantinople, today called Istanbul. So I went to look up the similarities. This was many years ago. I went to look up the similarities between Catholicism and Islam, and I just Googled for images, and these are the first two images that came up. And notice the similarities between them. It's kind of ironic. This wasn't planned, but we have Catholicism and Islam. They both have steeples, which is symbolic of a phallus. They both have a cupola, which is symbolic of a mammary gland. And then they both have, in their own various ways, they have halos and sunshine and stars and crescents and all these various sorts of things. There's a lot of spiritual comparisons that can be made between Catholicism and Islam. Each in their own way. They follow the most recent prophet of their understanding. The Catholics basically following Paul or Shaul. And then, of course, the Muslims following Muhammad. Now, there was a very interesting development. There was a gentleman by the name of Alberto Rivera, and he was a Jesuit priest who came into relationship with Yeshua. So he became a Christian, or what's called a born-again Christian. And he claims that he was told when he was a member of the Jesuit order, he received a secret briefing that the Catholic Church created Islam in order to attack non-Catholic Christians, Nazarenes effectively, and other forms of Christians outside of the areas of Roman imperial control. And he died of food poisoning. So the Jesuit order is infamous for its food poisoning, or for its poisons. Continuing on. So Muhammad's first wife was named Khadijah, and she was reportedly a Roman Catholic nun who was assigned to Muhammad to help him develop his new religion. And this allegedly gave the Catholics sort of an inside influence with Muhammad. So we also know that Khadijah's cousin was named Waraqwa. So Waraqwa, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't speak Arabic. But Waraqwa was also reportedly a devout Catholic, and she helped Muhammad write down his visions and helped him to interpret them. And of course, the Catholic Church vehemently denies this, but this is the same kind of a thing that Roman nations might do, is they have covert activities and black ops wings and this sort of a thing, and they'll do things that they will deny publicly, but they'll sort of like when the United States went to destabilize certain nations outside of their own borders, sort of like when the Soviet Union would supply arms to destabilize nations outside of their own borders. Well, so we're talking about a state-sponsored religion. And one of the things that we have seen in the past is that the Catholic Church is in favor of what's called the United Religions Initiative. And this is a concept of helping to embrace all the religions of the world, ostensibly under the mantle of Catholicism. And the term Catholicism literally means universal. So the Catholic Church is attempting to create a universal religion or a universal faith focused around the papacy. And you may have seen this bumper sticker, coexist. This is sort of a halfway step. They're attempting to get toward a united religion, again, under papal control. So, and again, this is the kind of a thing that Esau in Rome would do, is to help form a united global religion underneath the auspices of the papacy. So continuing in verse 12, it says, and he, referring to the state-sponsored religion of the URI, exercises all the authority of the first beast, or the government beast, in his presence. And he causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, to worship the government, whose deadly wound was healed. So once again, we have a government beast, the first beast, coming up out of the sea, and now we have the united religion, the state-sponsored religion, coming up out of the land, but they're both two halves of the same exact beast, but they will appear to be different on the surface. It says, he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And we don't know whether we're talking about lasers or whatever kind of advanced technology, but with today's technology, it wouldn't be difficult to make fire come down on the earth in the sight of men. Verse 14, it says, and he, the URI, deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the government beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath or spirit to the image of the government beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Now, we don't know exactly what this image of the beast will be. This is pure speculation, some recent speculation, but some people are talking about perhaps an artificial intelligence god. They're talking about, in fact, they've already got the Church of Artificial Intelligence out there, and the image could be some form of embodiment of an artificial intelligence god. Elon Musk, who's one of the forerunners in terms of technology, he's got the SpaceX program and Tesla Motors and other things going on. He says, we are summoning the demon with artificial intelligence. And what he's saying, I wish I could have found the quote, but in Hebrew, there's a word kashayuf, which it means sorcery or witchcraft, but it's also used as a synonym for technology. So it's interesting. We talk about a disembodied intelligence. The Knights Templar was a group in the Middle Ages under the Roman Catholic Church, and they had secret rituals in which they worshipped Baphomet, which was reportedly John the Baptist's dismembered head. However, the name Baphomet is derived from Muhammad. So Baphomet, Muhammad, there's a corruption in the concept, but we're talking about a disembodied intelligence. And the Satans later came to worship Baphomet, and here's a modern depiction of him. But once again, we're talking about a disembodied intelligence that sees all and knows all. So in verse 16, it continues. It says, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. And so we're talking about various things, and people get very concerned about a physical mark of the beast. What I'd like to suggest is that we're looking less for a physical mark of the beast and more for a spiritual mark. Even though the physical marks will abound in these end times, we should be looking for a spiritual mark rather than a physical one. It says, verse 17, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So in other words, if we're not loyal to the beast, if we don't take part in the beast system, we won't have the authority to purchase things. So some people try to point to a physical mark, such as the 666 that's embedded in the barcodes. Not everyone knows this, but the first bar, the last bar, and also the middle bar of any barcode is 6. And so you take the first, the middle, and the last, and you come up with 666. So people try to tell us that barcodes are the mark of the beast, but did anyone really lose their salvation because they bought something with the barcode on it? Doesn't make sense. Another thing people try to talk about is what's called the chip, or the RFID chip, or the microchip. And this is a small transponder that can be embedded in animals and also in humans in the right hand. And there is an agenda to get people to take this. But again, the question, if we're talking about physical mark of the beast theories, if someone forces you to take a microchip, do you lose your salvation? I remember people get very excited about these things. One person told me that their fear was that they were going to be hunted down out in the rural areas by teams and then taken to a FEMA camp, and having a physical object inserted in their hand was going to cause them to lose their salvation. And I would like to encourage people with Mark chapter 7 and verse 15, where Yeshua tells us, there's nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him. Now, this can be misunderstood. He says, but the things which come out of him from the inside out, those are the things which defile a man. So again, the question, if someone scans your face, if someone takes your biometrics, do you lose your salvation? The concept doesn't make sense. So if someone was to take your fingerprints or to scan, now they have these hand scanners, and apparently the veins in the hand form a very complex biometric levels of depth and this kind of a thing. But if someone scans your palm, do you lose your salvation? The reason I mention this is there's people that are concerned enough about iris scanning and palm scanning that they talk about gouging out their right eye and cutting off their right hand. And what I would suggest to you is that these things are unnecessary. Physical signs and symptoms, physical manifestations of the mark of the beast will abound in the end times. But we need to remember to look for a spiritual mark of a spiritual beast. Other people get concerned about the dollar bill as the mark. Now, in the United States dollar bill, there's satanic imagery all over it. And on the back, there's this infamous, it's Satan's pyramid with the all-seeing eye of Lucifer up top. Basically, we're talking about Big Brother and 1984 technology with Alexa and with all sorts of things. And the words annoit coeptis novus ordo secularum. And what that means is announcing the birth of the new world order. And the date they use for announcing the birth of the new world order is written on the bottom of the pyramid, is July the 4th, 1776. And the reason why the occultists celebrate July 4th, 1776, and the reason why they teach the Ephraimites, the Josephites, all to worship July 4th, 1776, is this is when the Ephraimites or the Josephites turned away from the means of governance found in the Bible, which is theocracy. And they've got them to accept democracy, which is the glue that Esau is using to hold the Babylonian beast together. So again, if we're going to be concerned about a physical mark of the beast, we're going to be concerned about dollar bills. Did anyone lose their salvation the last time they bought groceries? It doesn't make sense. Another question we could ask is, did Yeshua lose his salvation when he used Roman coinage in the first century? So, for example, in Matthew 17 and verse 27, those who collected the temple tax asked Simon Peter, does Yeshua not pay the temple tax? And he says, yes, of course he does. In verse 27, Yeshua says, nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take up the fish that comes first. He says, and when you've opened its mouth, you'll find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you. So this was almost certainly a Roman piece of coinage. So did Yeshua lose his salvation when he used Roman coinage? I don't believe so. So people ask, what is the mark of the beast? Well, the mark of Yahweh is loyalty and obedience to Yahweh. So the mark of the beast then would be loyalty and obedience to the beast. So Yeshua tells us that if we love him, we should keep his commandments. Obviously, if we love the beast, we're not going to keep Yeshua's commandments. We're going to do those things that the beast would have us do. So, verse 18, it says, "Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man, and his number is 666. And in Greek, that term that translates to chi, shai, stigma. Now, we're going to see that there's two legs of Rome, and there's the feet of iron mixed with Islamic clay, and there's two aspects of the second beast, because there's two horns that two horns like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. So we're going to see two fulfillments of this. The first one, which is the primary one, is vicarious filii Dei, and this pertains to Rome. And the second aspect is what's called the Bismillah, and this pertains to Islam. So the term for the Catholic Church, vicarious filii Dei, this comes from a forged document called the Donation of Constantine. And this forged document allegedly gave the papacy control of the western leg of the Roman Empire. Now, there's some very special things about this term vicarious filii Dei. So the term anti-Messiah, when we talk about an anti-Messiah, we're not so much talking about someone who fights against the Messiah or someone who seeks to kill the Messiah. But what we're talking about is a false Messiah or a substitute Messiah, someone who's given to us in the place of the Messiah. And this is the Pope's name. This is what vicarious filii Dei means. It literally means in the place of the Son of the Deity, or instead of the Son of the Deity. And this is why the Pope is oftentimes called the Vicar of Christ, or the substitute for Christ. And there's many languages that use what's called gematria. And gematria is where the language, each letter in the language has a numerical value to each one of the letters. And we take the gematria of vicarious filii Dei in Latin and add them all together, we equal the term we come up with the sum of 666. So then with the Islamic aspect, we give credit to this to two gentlemen, one by the name of Simon Altaf and another by the name of Walid Shubat. These were the gentlemen through whom this was revealed. But in Hebrew, we would say, Baruch haba b'shem Yahweh. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. Well, in Arabic is also a Semitic tongue. So they have a similar term, which they call the Bismillah. So this term Bismillah refers to the name of their God, Allah. And there's a depiction of the Bismillah. They sort of have an artistic rendering of it. This is what's called the Bismillah. So now if we take the Bismillah and we flip it diagonally, we see some surprising things if we match it up next to the Codex Vaticanus, which is one of the four oldest Greek manuscripts in existence. So the arrow now at the top of the Bismillah corresponds, that line that's under AD 350, that's not an error, that's actually an arrow. It corresponds to the Bismillah. And then what looks like a giant letter E, the Shai, that's also included in the handwritten manuscript of the Codex Vaticanus. So there's a correspondence, and the stigma also, if you look closely, you can see it in what looks like a round circle full of writing. It's all in there. So if we take the Chi Shai stigma from the Codex Vaticanus and we compare it to the Heinz and Noble of 1897, we can see that the arrow portion that's under AD 350 did not make it into the typewritten manuscript. But there we have the Chi Shai stigma. And Greek also is another language which has gematria values. So each one of the letters has a numerical value. The Chi, which is basically, it's like crossed swords, is a numerical value of 600. The Shai has the giant letter E has a numerical value of 60. And the stigma, which sort of looks like an off-shape S, has a numerical value of 6 for a grand total of 666. So now here we have the Codex Vaticanus, next to the Chechen flag, which is also rotated. So we have the crossed swords, the Chi, and we have the E, the Shai is in there, and if we also look, you can see the stigma. Now, it shouldn't surprise us to see the same correspondence of imagery between a Greek manuscript and an Arabic manuscript, because the Greek manuscript is level 3 of the Babylonian beast, and the Arabic manuscript is level 5 of the Babylonian beast. So it shouldn't surprise us to see the same images more or less recycled or reused or transposed in this sort of a thing. Same symbols, same beast. So continuing on, we know that the beast, the mark of the beast, will be found on the right hand or the right arm and on the forehead. So here's a picture of a Hamas headband and also a Hamas armband. So one is tied on the forehead, and it can also be tied on the right arm. And in Hebraic thought, the word yad works for both the hand and the arm. So the mark of the beast being on the forehead or on the right hand or the right arm. And once again, it adds up to 666. So here we see two fulfillments of Revelation 13:18, where it says, "Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So once again, we have two horns of the URI second beast, the state-sponsored religion, one of which if we have to choose a primary, we're going to choose the 666 belonging to the papacy, to the red horse. And if we look at the Bismillah sort of as a complementary 666, but it also corresponds to the eastern leg. So here we have two legs of the statue. Both are given their power by the beast, and both of them have a mark of the beast of 666. So please join us again for the next part of this series. We're talking about chapter 14, is the two harvests. To find out more information, I invite you please to go to www.nazarenisrael.org and research Revelation and the End Times. Shalom.